Okay, geometry students, in this video we will be laying the foundation for the rest of the chapter. You need to understand this material very well, so please do whatever it takes to make sure you understand this material, okay? We are definitely laying a foundation for the rest of the chapter, so it's really important you understand this information we're going to cover today, okay? Your heading for today is called Congruent Triangles. Congruent Triangles, the lesson number is 4.1, and I would encourage you to include today's date in your notes. All right. Once again, your heading today is Congruent Triangles. The lesson number is 4.1, and I would encourage you to include today's date. All right. Now, here we go. Let's start off by studying what we mean by the phrase congruent triangles. Okay. Congruent triangles. Now, copy this in your notes. Here it comes. Copy this down. I'll pause for a second while you copy this down. Two triangles are congruent. Please listen, students. If all three sides of one triangle are congruent to the other three sides of the other triangle, and, key word, all three angles of one triangle are congruent to the other three angles of the other triangle. Okay? Now I'm going to read this again as you copy this down. Two triangles are congruent if all three sides of one triangle, all three sides, are congruent to the other three sides of the other triangle, and all three angles of one triangle are congruent to the other three angles of the other triangle. Okay? It's so important you understand that the only way that you have congruent triangles is if all three angles in one triangle are congruent to the three angles in the other triangle, and all three sides of one triangle are congruent to all three sides in the other triangle. Okay, that's the only way you have congruent triangles. Okay, I'm going to wait a second while you quickly copy this down, then we're going to move on. Now, this next comment you do not need to write down unless you want to. Okay, here it is. Notice that all six parts, students, three sides and three angles of one triangle must be congruent to the other six parts of the other triangle. Must be. Okay? You don't have congruent triangles unless, hold on, that's my cell phone going off. Hold on one second, please. Sorry about that. All right. You don't have congruent triangles unless six parts from one triangle are congruent to the other triangle. Please understand that, and please don't be confused. Okay, now let's continue on. Now below, in a second, you will see how we mark congruent triangles in geometry, and you're also going to see how to write a congruence statement. Okay, so here we go. Please copy this in your notes. I will wait a second while you copy this down. Now try to draw these triangles exactly the way I've drawn them. It's very important that you see this, okay? So go ahead and draw your triangle like this, up, down, and over, like this, and then put a congruent statement in between them, and then draw your triangle like this, down, then kind of slant it up, and then slant it to the left, okay? I'm gonna pause a second while you do that. Be sure and call the vertices. Now, when I say vertices, I'm referring to the vertex here, okay? This is a vertex. More than one vertex. You don't call them vertexes, okay? It's called vertices. So, your vertices should be labeled with the same letters that I've used. So label this vertex A, this one B, this one C, this one D, this one E, this one F. Okay, I'll wait another second while you guys do that. Be neat in your notes, be organized, but also be quickly, okay? Quickly but not hurriedly is the best way to say it. Okay, now these two triangles are congruent. I'm going to go ahead and flip this around and show you, okay? Look, now you can, well, that's not a very good example. Let's do it like this. There we go. Now you can see those two triangles are identical. In fact, students, I cut and pasted this triangle here. I drew it and then copied it, cut and pasted it over here. They're identical triangles. Okay, they didn't look like it because they were drawn in different directions, but they're the exact same triangle, okay? I'm going to go ahead and put this back where it was. Hopefully. There we go. And so these two triangles are congruent. Another reason, now go ahead and mark these. Okay, look. Notice how angle A has one mark, angle F has 1 mark. That means those two angles are congruent. Notice angle B has 2 marks and angle E has 2 marks. So those two angles are congruent. Notice how angle C has 3 marks, and notice how angle D has 3 marks, so those two angles are congruent, okay? And then notice how this side here has 1 mark, and I hope you're putting all these marks on your triangles. You're supposed to, okay? Maybe I didn't make that clear, so go ahead and quickly put these marks up here as I'm talking about them. Notice that side AB has 1 mark, and side EF has 1 mark. That means they're congruent, okay? Notice that side BC has 2 marks, and side DE has 2 slashes. That means they're congruent, okay? And then notice that side AC has 3 marks, and side DF has 3 slashes or 3 marks also, so those two sides are congruent. So what I'm trying to show you, students, is all 3 angles in this triangle and all 3 sides in this triangle are congruent to these 3 angles over here and these 3 sides over here, okay? You need to see that. Thus, because of that, these 2 triangles are congruent, okay?
Daddy's getting off.
Okay, now let's continue.
Jamie's 33, South Little my name.
Okay, next, students, let's learn how to write a congruent statement, okay? Next, let's learn how to write a congruent statement. This is really important that you know how to do this. It's very, very important, and it's foundational for the rest of the chapter, okay? So please take notes as you watch me do this, okay? Watch carefully. Take some good notes. Now, I'm going to write the first triangle, put your triangle symbol, then triangle ABC, okay? So go ahead and write triangle ABC, then put congruent. And you're probably thinking, oh, this is easy. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, and that's wrong. That's totally wrong. Don't do that. The reason it's wrong is when you write a congruent statement, and you juniors should hopefully remember this from 8th grade. We went over this in 8th grade, 3 years ago, but it's been a while, I guess. But anyways, hopefully you remember. But look at your first letter here is A, and A has 1 mark. So you come over here and you find the angle with 1 mark, and it's F. So F has to come first. Now look at your second letter, B. Well, B has 2 marks. So come over here and find your angle with 2 marks. It's E. Now your last angle is C. It has 3 marks. So you come over here and find your angle with 3 marks, D. That is a true congruent statement. If you don't write it like that in this class, any geometry class, you'll miss it, okay? And you're probably thinking, well, Mr. Earhart, what if these letters over here were turned around? Okay, no big deal. Let's say you decide to write triangle BAC. No problem. But if you do that, then you got to change these letters over here because the angle that corresponds with B is E, so E has to come first. And the angle that corresponds with A is F, so F has to come second. And then C is last, and the angle that corresponds with C is D, so D comes last here. Okay, so it's very, very important that you know how to write these statements, okay? Please, students, understand that. All right, it's very important. So take notes on this. All right, having said that, I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next page. All right, here we go. Now, I know some of you found this easy, but others need a little practice. So quickly, don't be arrogant and say, oh, some students are slower than, look, let's work together, okay? Quickly, let's write some congruent statements. So in your notes, I want you to copy down these 2 triangles quickly, okay? So copy your triangle like this. Make it a right triangle, okay? And then draw one like this here, over and then up. And even though they don't look congruent, they're totally congruent. In fact, I cut and pasted this triangle. There it is, just like that. It's the exact same triangle. I drew this triangle over here that I cut and pasted over here. All right, so go ahead and draw your triangle like this and draw your triangle like this. And I guess I should have done this. And you're like, well, Mr. Earhart, why do you keep drawing your triangles turned around and twisted like that? Because I want you to learn to, now listen to me, I want you to learn to check if triangles are congruent, not by using your eyes and what the 2 triangles look like, but instead seeing if 3 angles are congruent to 3 angles and if 3 sides, and I forgot to put this one over here, sorry, 1, 2, 3, and this should have 3. All kinds of mistakes today, there we go. I want you to learn to check if the angles and the sides are congruent to the angles and the sides over here. Now you can work ahead or you can watch me, but I want you to very quickly write 6 congruent statements. Okay, so here we go. So in your notes, quickly, students, copy these 2 triangles in your notes. Okay, and then go ahead and copy this down and let's write some congruent statements, okay? Here we go. Now, I know I'm going fast. I know I'm pushing you guys. We really have a lot to cover today, so I'm trying to go quickly, okay? And Miss Frampton, or whoever the supervising teacher is, if I go too fast, just pause the video, okay? All right, triangle GHI, okay? G has 1 mark, so the 1 mark angle over here is K, so triangle K. The second letter is H. H is a 90-degree angle, so the 90-degree angle over here is J. I has 2 marks, so I come over here and find the angle with 2 marks. It's L. There, I did it. So now the rest of these should be pretty easy. G corresponds with K, H corresponds with J, I corresponds with L. No big deal. Now, here we go. What if you wrote triangle GIH? Okay, well, G corresponds with K, I corresponds with L, and H corresponds with J. There it is. Okay, now, how about if I wrote triangle HGI? Okay, let's see. H corresponds with J, G corresponds with K, and I corresponds with L. There we go. What if we wrote triangle HIG, H-I-G? Well, H corresponds with J, I corresponds with L, and G corresponds with K. All right, now triangle IGH, okay? Well, I corresponds with L, G corresponds with K, and H corresponds with J. I'm doing these quickly. I hope I'm not making any mistakes. If I was there in class, students would just raise their hand and say, oh, Mr. Earhart, you made a mistake here or there, and I hope that's not happened. But if it has, you guys can figure that out and continue on, okay? Now, triangle IHJ. Well, I corresponds with L, H corresponds with J, and G corresponds with K. So there we go. Now, I'm going to move on. If the video needs to be paused, that's fine. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to some more information with students. Hopefully you're seeing this. You must be able to write congruent statements. And students, can I say something else to you guys? I got to show you one more thing before I go on to another page. It's so important that you see this. So please get ready to write this down. Now students, watch this. This is so cool. Okay, now everything in math is cool, of course. Everything, but this is extra cool, okay? Watch this. I would take some notes on this, okay? Let's take this right here. Let's pull it over here. Why that one? No reason. I just picked it out. This is so neat. Watch this. Did you know that we don't even have to look at the picture up here to know which angles are congruent and which sides are congruent in this triangle? That's why it's so important you write your congruent statements accurately. Okay, watch this. I'm going to slide this over, put it on black. Now watch. Now watch this. This is so cool. Just by looking at this statement right here, I know that angle H is congruent to angle what? J, because they correspond. I didn't even need to look at the triangles to know that. Look at this. Angle G, and that is a G, believe it or not, is congruent to angle K. Angle G is congruent to angle K because G corresponds with K. And look at this. Angle I is congruent to angle L. They correspond. Here's I, here's L. I didn't even need to look at the pictures to know that. And look at this. It gets even better. Watch this. Okay, see your first 2 letters here, HG. See your first 2 letters over here, JK. Those 2 segments are congruent. So you know side HG is congruent to side JK. Without even looking at the picture, because your first 2 letters here and your first 2 letters here correspond. Look at your last 2 letters. GI is congruent to KL. Look at that. Last 2 letters, last 2 letters. Without even looking at the picture. And then lastly, your first letter H and your last letter I, HI, would correspond with JL. So without even looking at the triangles, you know that HI is congruent to JL. Now I'm going to pull this thing away right here. And look, everything I said here is right. H is congruent to J, G is congruent to K, I is congruent to L. Look at this. HG has 1 mark, JK has 1 mark, GI has 3 marks, KL has 3 marks, HI has 2 marks, JL has 2 marks. Okay, students, your congruent statements tell you so much about your congruent triangles. That's why A, it's important you write them the correct way, and B, it's important you understand what they mean. Okay, let's continue on. Here we go. All right, we need to look at classifying triangles. Okay, and there are 2 ways we can classify triangles, either by their sides or by their angles. Now I'm going to go really fast, and all of these terms I'm going to show you, you have heard of these your entire life. They're not new, but you still got to write them down. Okay, and number two, you are responsible for these on tests and quizzes, unfortunately. Okay, so here we go. All right, first of all, there are 3 ways to classify triangles by their sides. 3, and here they are. Number 1, equilateral triangle. An equilateral triangle is a triangle with 3 congruent sides. You have to write really quickly. Okay, you might want to write it like this: a triangle with 3 congruent sides, something like that. It's up to you, but we do have to go quickly. Okay, it's your decision. Okay, number 2, an isosceles triangle. Make sure you spell these words right. Okay, have good proper spelling. The isosceles triangle is a triangle with with at least 2 congruent sides. It can have 3, but it must have at least 2 congruent sides. Okay. Number 3, a scalene triangle. A scalene triangle is a triangle with no congruent sides. None. Okay? So these are the 3 ways that you can classify triangles based on their sides. Okay? Now, moving on. Please write quickly. I know I'm kind of jamming you guys. We have to hurry. There are 4 ways to classify triangles by their angles. 4. Here they are. Number 1, an equiangular triangle, and that's a triangle that has 3 congruent angles. Number 2, a right triangle, and you know what that is, a triangle that has 1 right angle. Number 3, number 3, an acute triangle. An acute triangle is a triangle that has 3 acute angles. My pen's not working here. There we go. Hold on 1 second. 3 acute angles. Number 4, an obtuse triangle. An obtuse triangle is a triangle that has 1 obtuse angle. Don't forget, acute angles are angles less than 90. Obtuse angles are angles greater than 90. Okay, these are 7 ways to classify triangles. 3 classify triangles by their sides, and 4 classify triangles by their angles. Okay, moving on. It is also important that you know the names of certain parts of certain triangles. Okay, you must know the names of certain parts. So here we go. Please copy this in your notes. A right triangle. Draw this in your notes, please, and label it a right triangle. Okay, so draw this triangle in your notes and label it a right triangle. Now, these 2 sides right here that form the right angle, these 2 sides here that form the right angle are called legs. Okay, label them legs. The right angle right here always points to the hypotenuse. Okay, the right angle always points to the hypotenuse. Don't forget that. It's an easy way to remember where the hypotenuse is. So this side over here is called the hypotenuse. Okay, copy that down. I'll give you just a second to do that. Okay, moving on. Copy this isosceles triangle, please. Copy this isosceles triangle. We're going to state that this side here is congruent to this side here. Okay, isosceles triangle. Okay, here we go. These 2 congruent sides, and by the way, I don't care which way you turn this triangle. I don't care if you flip it upside down or sideways. the two congruent sides in an isosceles triangle are always called the same thing. They're called the legs. Please make note of that. The legs. The, the other third side is always called the base. Make note of that. Now, on the base side here, students, there's always going to be two angles on the ends of your base. So here's your base, and I don't care which way you turn this triangle, the base is always the non-congruent side. And this base here will always have two angles, one here at the end and one here at the end. Those angles are always called base angles, so please make note of that, okay? Base angles. And let me say this to you students real quick, okay? I don't care which way. I don't care which way you turn this triangle, okay? Some students think, oh, the triangle's this way, so this right here should be your base. No, not if it's an isosceles triangle. If it's an isosceles triangle, students, the two congruent sides, I don't care which way the triangle's flipped, the two congruent sides will always be your legs, and the non-congruent side will always be your base, no matter which way it's flipped. Okay, so please understand that. All right, let's continue on. By the way, make note of this. Base angles of an isosceles triangle are always congruent. Base angles of an isosceles triangle are always congruent. So this angle here and this angle here will always be congruent. Okay, let's continue on. Now students, in closing, before I do a proof, and I am going to do a proof today, okay, so no cheers, all right? I want to give you one quick important note. Please write this down. You can use the reflexive, symmetric, and transitive properties for triangles. Write that down, okay? Write this down right here. You can use the reflexive, the symmetric, and the transitive properties for triangles. Let me show you what I mean, okay, real quick here. Write this down. I can say triangle ABC is congruent to triangle ABC, and that's called the reflexive property, okay? That's an example of that, okay? Write that down, please. I can state if triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, then triangle DEF is congruent to triangle ABC. Do you remember what that's called? That's called the symmetric property, okay? So make note of that, okay? I'm giving you examples of these. You can use the reflexive, the symmetric, and the transitive properties for triangles. So ABC is congruent to ABC, that's reflexive. If ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, then DEF is congruent to ABC, that's called symmetric. And then lastly, very quickly, if triangle ABC, and as you can tell, I'm not trying to get the penmanship of the award of the year, okay? I'm trying to go faster. If triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, and triangle DEF is congruent to triangle GHI, then, and you should know what to put, students, if ABC is congruent to DEF, and DEF is congruent to GHI, then triangle ABC is congruent to triangle GHI. And you should know what we call that. We call that transitive, okay? The transitive property. All right, now let's go ahead and jump into the proof. If I've gone too fast here, just raise your hand, let your teacher know, and he or she can pause the video and let you copy this down, okay? I'm going to go ahead and move on. Here we go. Now, lastly, I want to do a proof for you. Please listen to me. I think it will really drive home the concept of congruent triangles. However, you do not need to take notes, although you can if you want. The only problem is I'm intentionally going really fast, probably too fast for you to take notes. I think you will take more from the proof if you just listen and focus all of your attention on what I'm saying and not try to write it down. That's my opinion, okay? So here we go. I want you to sit back. Sorry, excuse me. Let me get a drink here. I want you to sit back and just kind of listen to this proof, okay? Here we go. Okay, students, so here we go. We're given that AB is congruent to CD, all right? AB is parallel to CD. E is the midpoint of BC and AD, and we're going to prove that this triangle here, we'll call it triangle number 1, is congruent to this triangle down here, triangle number 2. Now remember, well, first of all, let me say this to you, students. First thing we're going to do is we're going to pick up all of our given right here, and we're going to put it on our figure over here. So watch this carefully. AB is congruent to CD. So I'm going to put a mark here and a mark here. AB is parallel to CD. So when you're doing a proof like this, pick up all of your given and write it onto your figure, okay? So AB is parallel to CD. So if I can get my arrow right here, there we go. Now, E is the midpoint of BC. So here's BC right here. If E is in the middle, which it is, then I know that this segment here is congruent to this segment here. And it also says that E is the midpoint of AD. So if E is right in the middle of this segment right here, then I know that this segment here is congruent to this segment here. So hopefully you see what I did there. I pick up my given and I put it onto the picture. Okay, now next I'm going to brainstorm. Now students, if I want to prove that two triangles are congruent, then doesn't it make sense that I'm going to have to prove that all three angles are congruent to these three angles down here, and I'm going to have to prove that all three sides up here are congruent to these three sides down here. Now also understand, students, that just because I've marked it on the diagram doesn't mean that I've stated it yet in my proof. Okay, I still have to state it down here in my proof. Okay, so here's the next thing we do is we go ahead and set up our statements and our reasons. Okay, so we go ahead and do that. Now the first thing we do, and you guys should know this, is we're going to write our given. Okay, so watch. Now again, just sit back. Look, let me pause and say something. Some of you are probably breaking out into a cold sweat and hyperventilating, okay? Look, I'm not asking you to be able to do this. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm not asking you to get up in front of the class and do proof presentations, although I had to do that in some college classes that I took, okay? I'm not asking you to do that, okay? Just listen and see if this makes sense. The more times you see a proof being done the right way, then the more times it helps you understand how to do it. So here we go. Just watch, and hope this will make sense to you. Okay, the first thing you do is you write down your given. Okay, so I picked all of this up, and I put it right here, and I put given. Okay, now students, let's check off. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to check off every time I stayed over here, one of my parts being congruent to the other triangle. I'm going to check that off. Okay, so look right here in my given. In my given, I stated that AB is congruent to CD. So I'm going to go ahead and circle this and circle this. Now remember, I have 6 parts up here. I have to state are congruent to these 6 parts down here. Okay, so here we go. There's part number 1. Okay, so I'm 1/6 of the way done. Okay, all right. Number 2. See if that makes sense. Angle 1's congruent to 5, so I'm going to circle it. 1's congruent to 5, and 2's congruent to 4. So here's 2 congruent to 4. All right. Now, how can I state that? Well, I'm glad you asked. Look, here's a line parallel to this line. How do I know they're parallel? It's given to me right there. Look, we have a transversal. Guys, students, dudes, look. I've got a parallel line cut by a transversal. Angle 1 and angle 5 are alternate interior angles. They are, really. I'm not lying to you. Okay? Look, here's a line, parallel line, cut by a transversal right here. Angle 2 and angle 4 are alternate interior angles. Look at it like this, guys. Watch. If I had a line like this and a line like this that were parallel, and this line coming down, this angle here, angle 1 and angle 2, or angle 5, angle 1 and angle 5 are alternate interior angles. Does that help you see it better right here? Look at this. Here's my 2 parallel lines. There's a line coming down like this. Here's my line. Well, this angle here, angle 2, and this angle here, 4, they're alternate interior angles, are they not? Sure they are. Well, Mr. Earhart, how'd you know these two lines were parallel? It was given to you right here. AB is parallel to CD. So what is my reason that I can state that 1's congruent to 5 and 2's congruent to 4? Well, here's my reason. Alternate interior angles are congruent. So now I have this congruent to this congruent to this, and this congruent to this. Now, let's move on. Number 3. 3 is congruent to 6. Angle 3 is congruent to 6. Now, students, that one's really obvious. Do you not see why I can state that? I hope you do. Come on, guys. They're vertical angles. Anytime two lines intersect, this angle is congruent to this angle, and this angle here is congruent to this angle here. Okay? So, I can state that angle 3 is congruent to angle 6 by vertical angles are congruent. Okay? Moving on. I can state that AE is congruent to ED. How can I state that? Look. Definition of midpoint. Well, Mr. Earhart, how do you know that E is the midpoint? It's given to you in your given right here. So because E is the midpoint of AD, I can state that this is congruent to this. Now look at number 5. I can state that BE is congruent to EC. Here's BE, and here's EC. Right here I can state that because look, E's the midpoint of BC. So what's my reason? Definition of midpoint. Now I think we're almost done. Yeah, we're done. Look right here. Look right here. I'm going to circle it. AB is congruent to CD. So AB is congruent to CD. Angle 1 is congruent to 5. Angle 1 is congruent to 5. Angle 2 is congruent to 4. Angle 2 is congruent to 4. Angle 3 is congruent to 6. Angle 3 is congruent to 6. AE is congruent to ED. So this side here is congruent to this side here. And BE is congruent to EC. Now I have successfully won the sloppiest proof of the year award, okay? But look at this. I stated in my proof, I stated that all three sides in this triangle are congruent to all three sides of this triangle. And I also stated that all three angles in this triangle are congruent to all three angles in this triangle. And here they are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I stated that all 6 parts of this triangle here are congruent to all 6 parts in this triangle. Thus, I can state that triangle AEB is congruent to triangle DEC. And look, students, I was very careful to write my statement of congruence, my congruence statement, very accurately, okay? Angle A corresponds with angle D, and that's right. Angle E corresponds with E, and that's right. This here and this here. Angle B corresponds with angle C. Well, that's right. This angle is congruent to this angle. And what's my reason? How can I state this? Definition of congruent triangles. I mean, look, I stated that all 6 parts up here are congruent to all 6 parts down here. So once I state that, I can definitely state that the 2 triangles are congruent. And my reason is definition of congruent triangles. Okay? I hope this video has been a help to you. I know it's been a blessing. I'm kidding to you. I hope it's been helpful. Call or email if you have any questions.